Welcome to Unsilent with your hosts Dave and Brian. This is not another current events podcast. We're digging deeper, diagnosing, and discussing what's really going on today, how we got here, and providing observations for future generations.
Welcome to Unsilent. We're Brian and Dave. We're hoping you let us know where you think we got it right and where you think we have completely missed the point of what's going on today, which you can do by visiting unsilentpodcast.com. So let's get into it. What should we talk about today, Brian?
Well, I think it's interesting to look at the change in our culture over the last, I would say, 30 to 40 years for sure, in regards to comedians, what we're allowed to poke fun at, and who can laugh at themselves. I think these are indicators of a complete shift. So kind of to set the context of what I'm talking about, when I grew up, in my 12 to 17 years old, late 80s, early 90s, I watched a lot of Richard Pryor. I watched a lot of Eddie Murphy. I watched a lot of George Carlin. Sure. Like it or not, right or wrong, that would explain kind of my outlook on a lot of things, quite frankly. And they poked fun at guys like Richard Nixon, who were perceived as guys who could not laugh at themselves. And part of the joke was they couldn't laugh at themselves. Like the emperor's wearing no clothes. Like we all could see the folly and we all could see the humor, but the idea of Richard Nixon like mocking himself, not likely, right? Okay. The idea of George Bush the first, Herbert Walker mocking himself, like there's no way, right? And that was part of the joke was, George Carlin, with his perceptions and Richard Pryor with his perceptions and like poking fun at that. And now, and those guys traditionally would be considered progressive, I would say. Like if you looked at the, modern day, I don't know, but back then they were, George Carlin was a wild liberal back in his day, right? Now, the people poking the fun and laughing at themselves and laughing at others are the extreme MAGA conservative, whatever. And the people who cannot laugh at themselves are the AOCs and the Ilhan Omars. And it's interesting to me to watch that dynamic change. And I'm legitimately curious, like how this will play out. The people who couldn't laugh at themselves before were kind of, it became like Michael J. Fox's character in Family Ties. Like it was weird to be aligned with him because they were just out of touch. Like they couldn't, they weren't regular people. Right. And I wonder if that's going to be the path this goes, because at some point Ilhan Omar with her weird things that she's allegedly done or whatever. And the fact that she can't laugh at herself, like it's going to be weird if history kind of repeats itself in this way, that to be aligned with folks like that. Or do we go down the path of Xi Jinping, who is right now at this moment as I'm talking, if I put in my iPhone GIFs, if I search for GIFs, I can find them for Donald Trump. I can find them for Joe Biden. I can find them for any president or any head of state in the world except Xi Jinping.
Is that right?
You cannot find, I cannot find a GIF of him in which he's being made fun of on my iPhone today.
Interesting.
So I wonder if we will go down the path of following China along what they're doing, and now Apple is doing to make them happy.
Make them happy, sure.
Or if history will repeat themselves and Ilhan Omar and the AOCs of the world who can't laugh at themselves, like Keith Olbermann who can't laugh at themselves, will become like odd people to like align yourself with. What do you think?
Well, it seems to me that we have these people are the new Puritans. Not Puritans in the way that we think of the original Puritans who escaped, religious persecution to come to this country. But they're new Puritans in the sense that if you say or look or do anything out of the norm, including making fun of it, then you are bad. So not only can the late night comics not make fun of themselves, or the folks that are the quote unquote cultural leaders these days make fun of themselves, they can't poke fun at any of the concepts that they vociferously advocate for. So, for instance, race. Can you imagine? So, do you remember the movie Airplane?
Yes.
So do you remember? And so I suppose our podcast platforms might have to bleep out what I'm just about to say in mentioning the
You'll be
airplane.
okay. We'll put an E on here and say Dave saying
It's
bad words, but not Brian.
It's explicit. Well, in Airplane, I remember on Airplane there were two African Americans. They were sitting in the seat and they were talking kind of street slang back and forth to each other, and there were subtitles to translate it into English, into modern day English.
Right.
And now I saw a while back somebody there was an actual warning on one of the streaming platforms. I don't remember which one it was, but there was a warning about this movie because it said some very inappropriate things, some things that you do not say. So in that case, there were these black guys making fun of themselves, and it was funny to everybody. It wasn't funny to just white neo-Nazi racists. It was funny to everybody because it was self-deprecating. Now that in modern day terms, that would be you can't make fun of anything having to do with race. You can't make fun of anything having to do with gender. You can't make the only thing you can make fun of are the dominant class, quote unquote, or whoever is designated to be the dominant class who doesn't fit in the intersectional, hierarchy of victimhood. Those are the only folks you can make fun of. And if you do so outside of that, then you do fall into a danger of excommunication. So that's why you don't see all of the things that, my background, my ancestors were Irish, right? Yeah. And so what do they call Irish people? They called us mix, I don't even know what the term that means, but it doesn't.
It's just short for Mick, whatever, McNaughton and McKnight and I think that's how I learned. I don't know if that's historically accurate or not. That's what I learned about.
It could be. But there every cultural or ethnic or racial group, there's been
WAPs were without papers. That was short for without papers because they were coming from Italy and they didn't have the right immigration documents.
You're a virtual panoply of cultural.
I don't know what that word you said means, but I'll take it.
That's good.
But anyhow, every group had their thing that they could be made fun of for.
Right, and it wasn't considered a personal attack on somebody.
I also lived in South Texas for a year when I was in what grade was I in? 5th or 6th grade.
Right.
And I learned that wetback was because their backs were still wet from swimming across the Rio Grande River. That's where that came from.
Okay.
I learned that in 6th grade from actual Mexican people. I learned it from the actual people who tease. And here's what's funny about that. Actually, now I think about it, they were American citizens who were pissed at people who were coming across illegally. Yeah. They were the ones that coined the term wetbacks.
Well, and those are things that you could on late night TV, people would make lots of jokes about themselves. Yeah. Richard Pryor was one to make lots of racially tinged jokes that and nobody thought anything of it. He was just being funny. So there was a more relaxed attitude. But and the reason I say that we are now in a status of more sort of societal Puritanism is because not only are you not allowed to contradict the main sort of line of society if you make fun of, or if you just in jest say something without any cruelty or without any intention of exalting yourself, you're considered cancelable. That sort of ties back to our episode on cancel culture. So it really has shifted dramatically.
Well, and it's funny, you talk about these guys being the new Puritans.
Yeah.
The more you and I talk about this stuff, the more it feels like it is one religion trying to conquer another. It really feels no different than again, I don't know history like you do, but there's, hundreds or thousands of instances of one religion trying to conquer another. And it feels very much like that. Sure. And what the religion the rules we were under were, every ethnic group, every group of people has done horrific things to other people.
Of course.
Every ethnic group has stereotypes that are stereotypes for a reason that are pretty funny.
Sure. Absolutely.
In 1992, I think the movie came out, White Men Can't Jump.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
It was a blockbuster movie that year. There's a reason for that. Right. And it was not only okay to poke fun at that, it was necessary. I think I don't know. I'm overstepping here. This is a hypothesis. I would think it would be necessary to keep the playing field level. If you
Sure.
don't have that kind of we all have our things that are funny, and we've all done the things that are stupid.
Right.
But none of us is above being poked fun at, which is what
Absolutely.
makes us all the same.
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly right.
And the people who didn't fit into that, the Richard Nixons, were outcasts. The George H.W. Bushes were outcasts because, of course, we should all be able to make fun of each other.
Right.
Because that's what keeps us humble.
Exactly.
And the humility and the being humble is a part of that religion that we all kind of embraced.
Right.
That was endearing and made it so that we were all the same.
It made it authentic. I
yes.
mean, at the end of the day, it made it authentic. It was saying that, yes, it's a level playing field. Every culture has its high points. Every culture has its low points. Every person has their high points and low points. There's a common humanity. And,
Yes.
the idea of the United States used to be that we're a melting pot. It's not like, well, you've got, here's white culture, here's black culture, here's Hispanic culture, here's Asian culture. It wasn't that there was a bunch of different little cities, each one that was, ethnically, same. It was that we all worked together. And that to me, we're talking, people will say, well, diversity is your strength. Well, I think our strength is cooperation more than it is just diversity. Everybody should communicate, everyone from all diverse backgrounds. Everybody should interact with one another. That's the whole melting pot idea that we've lost. And as a result of that, we have gotten this sort of puritanical, here's the intersectional pyramid of who is a victim. And you can't even joke about anybody that's on this victim scale. It used to be, even before gay marriage became a thing. I mean, there's always been gay people among us, and they've always got married. I mean, it's always throughout humanity. There were plenty of gay people that did gay skits that were really funny, and they were just making fun of themselves, just like white people can't jump, making fun of ourselves. Everybody making fun of themselves. When we lose that, we do end up in a place very much like, I would say, the Dark Ages Catholic Church, where if you say the wrong things, you've got two choices. Either you could be excommunicated or you could do penance. Now, in modern society, the excommunication is obvious. That's cancel culture. We've dealt with that before. But the paying the penance in the old days, in the Dark Ages, you would pay a certain amount of money and get your sins forgiven. Now what you do is you hire a consultant for whatever, intersectional group you've apparently offended by your, by your comedy. And that's how you pay money.
Their lawyers somehow makes them feel better. Somehow paying their lawyers is the mechanism that brings them peace.
Just like paying the priesthood, just like donating to the priesthood is what
at least the priest got the money, though. Like in this case, like the people only get 70% of it. The lawyers get a third of it.
That's right. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
So a couple things for Kenny G listening, and for those of you who don't know who Kenny G is a person who's probably going to be born somewhere around 2040. That's who we're talking to in these things, as we're kind of chronicling what these moments are like and what these cultural changes have been like over the last, as we're now recording, is 2024, but over the last, 15, 16 years ish, a lot of big cultural things. We're talking to a person, Kenny G, born in around 2040, who'll be middle-aged around the year 2080, somewhere in there, 2075, and explaining what this is like, kind of just chronicling it, because we think, Dave and I think, Kenny G is going to be coming upon his own moment in his own cycle where he'll be experiencing similar kinds of things. So when we're talking to Kenny G, that's what we're talking about. Anyhow, before I forget, Kenny G, if you're listening, you got to watch Blazing Saddles. You got to watch Spaceballs.
It's true.
And to Dave's point on great comedic routines on homosexuality, you got to find Greg Giraldo's bit on being gay from around 2006 or 2007.
Right.
Those are must see if they're even available. Blazing Saddles will long have been banned probably, but if you can find a VHS tape somewhere that hasn't been destroyed, you gotta watch it. Anyhow, so yeah, I agree with all those things. Like, and as you were talking about those things and like, what stood out to me is if there was a patriarchy, which I don't agree that there was. I do agree that historically men have had different roles than women. There's no question about that. I don't argue that part. I don't believe that there was a concerted effort and a well orchestrated effort to keep women down. Trying to get 7 people to do the same thing is already hard enough. Trying to get 100 million people to do the same thing, pretty impossible, right? But if there was a patriarchy, I think it was evidenced in that kind of making fun of ourselves and each other. Because if you get a group of 4 men together, that's how they talk to each other. They bust each other's chops about stuff, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So if there was a patriarchy in how the society worked, it was that we kept the field level by not letting not any one group get too big for their britches.
Exactly.
Yeah, the Jews had their thing, and the blacks had their thing, and the Puerto Ricans. Even I didn't live in New York City, of course, so I've heard lots of things. I don't have any firsthand experience with that kind of stuff, but every group had their thing that they could be cut back down to size on if they got too far out of whack.
Right. Yeah, and that was healthy.
It was healthy, and if you had a woman come into a conversation with a group of 5 friends from high school or college or had worked together for many years who really liked each other and loved each other, not in a weird way, but like how men can like grow to really love each other like brothers or good close friends. They express love by cutting each other down and like busting each other's chops. That's how it worked, right? If a woman walked into that room, she would think these guys absolutely hated each other.
Oh, sure. Yeah. They've reverted to high school and they're just bullies. And,
how could you like that guy? He just called you 7 different names you couldn't repeat in front of your kids. Well, that's how he shows me he loves me. That's how.
Yeah.
And it kind of feels like if there was a patriarchy and we're moving away from it, that's maybe it. Like we're not allowed to do that. And it's like I don't remember the name of the gal from Little House on the Prairie. She was the old crotchety old lady that nobody liked.
Oh yeah. Sure.
Harriet maybe was her name. I don't know. Whatever her name
remember.
Was. But she always had a frown and like there was no laughter around that woman.
Right.
It kind of feels like people like her, again, who cannot be made fun of, that don't look like her. They look like Ilhan Omar, have moved into places and they have decided they are the arbiter of what's funny and what's acceptable and how different groups will be treated. And what was tossed out is the mechanism to keep everyone on an equal playing field, which was laughing at the things that they do that are absurd, which again, we all have. And that was replaced by a hierarchy of who is allowed to be laughed at and who's not.
Exactly. And whoever is not allowed to be laughed at is the one who is really in charge. If you think about it, whoever you can't criticize, whoever you can't laugh at, whoever you can't make fun of, whatever group. Now it's whatever group that, you can't say anything about that because you're not a part of that group or, whatever those types of things happen to be. And the problem again for Kenny G and the problem in our day is it produces a humorless society is one we need to laugh. We have to laugh as human beings. If we don't have that outlet, then we're just consumed with tragedy. We're consumed with the negative things that come upon us. If you can laugh at the human condition, and the reality is, it's true that the reality is that all of us, regardless of our race, of our identity, of our, culture, whatever, we all have almost everything in common. I mean, we really do.
Oh, for sure.
We're humans, right? And if we can't laugh at each other.
Above all else, we are human. And there's many common denominators there. Yeah, for sure.
For better or for worse, we're that.
Yeah.
And if we don't have the ability then to experience humor and to say, we can say this safely, you and I, well, those funny looking bald guys, it's
right.
So when you get to that point, I think you have a society that is sick. You have a society, and this is the danger for Kenny G. When your society stops being able to laugh at itself, when it stops, when there are certain people that are above both reproach and above criticism and above making jokes about, that's when your society becomes emotionally ill. And that's what our society is today. It's emotionally ill, and an emotionally ill society doesn't last.
Immature, if not ill, it's at least immature for sure.
Well, and what does that lead to? I would push and I would say it's really ill. It's emotionally ill because a society like that can't laugh at itself and that oppresses those that try to laugh at society is one that doesn't have a lot of staying power. because, we're consumed with all the negative. And that is what you're going to find in a crisis era. That's what we're going to find in this crisis that we're in now. That's what Kenny G is going to find near the turn of the next century, a society that doesn't have the ability, and that's weak. It's really weak.
Yeah.
We can't make decisions. We're always walking on eggshells. That's a weak society that's preparing to either fall or it's preparing to shift in a radical way such that it can laugh at itself again.
And this is one of those things, kind of like we were talking, one of the last couple episodes we did talking about, teen suicide and unhappiness and things like that. Like you said, if there's no outlet, life sucks in a lot of ways.
Yeah,
there's lots of stress. There's lots of angst. There's lots of sadness. There's lots of disappointment. There's a lot of fear. There's lots of things that are not very fun. And for many of those, the only counterbalancing act is laughter.
Yes, exactly.
And you have to have some joy and you have to have some happiness to offset the wide range of fairly unpleasant things that are part of this ride.
It takes the edges off. It takes the edges off the pain.
Yes.
If you can laugh at the pain, if you can laugh at the unfairness of the world, if you can say that these, this thing that's happening over here, but what about this? If you can laugh at it, it lessens. It's sort of a safety net, I think, for the human psyche. It lessens the impact of the negative thing that's there.
Well, it's the saying, if I didn't laugh, I would cry. Like that's a saying for a reason.
Yes, exactly. That's good.
What I'm, like I said, same like with the teens and the suicide and unhappiness and stuff like that. We're doing these things that are leading to a negative outcome.
Yeah.
We had a country where we could laugh and we could have fun and we could enjoy things proportion to the unpleasantries. Does that mean people are not oppressed? Of course it doesn't. Does that mean there aren't wealthy people who are given a hand up when they're born? Yeah. For my entire youth, I thought I should have been born the Sultan of Brunei's kid. That would have been awesome. It didn't work out that way. I wasn't dealt that hand. Okay, well, that's just the way it goes. But do we want to end up in a society where laughter is not allowed? Like we had this gift of having happiness handed to us. We're born into a situation where this happiness was handed to us, and we're doing our damnedest to create North Korea, where there's no word for the word love. There's no word for there's no word for love. Like that, we're aiming for this, and people will listen to this and go, modern who are here now will listen to this and say, that's a bunch of hogwash. It's not that bad. What evidence? Like you show me the evidence that says that there's more laughter now than there was in 1988. I'd love to hear it.
Right, absolutely.
Like, teen suicide would be down, not up.
Right.
The people who think the thing we're going in the right direction versus the wrong direction would be opposite what it is now. There's plenty of metrics to tell us that people are less happy than they were, and they're making more money.
Oh yeah,
all these things we say we care about, but we're not allowed to laugh at certain kinds of people.
Yeah,
and we used to be, and for me, this stands out as like one of those clear, like we're cruising along, and we just took a random left turn. Like all of a sudden, somewhere around 2008, it was no longer okay to laugh at certain kinds of people.
Well, the society, part of it, I think, is the societal currency became victimhood, and it became being offended. So for a great amount of time, a lot of the people that were the most respected, like Johnny Carson, one of the most respected people in our society for a lot of the time I was growing up, and he was self-deprecating. He did his, Sargon the Magnificent, and
Karnak, wasn't it? Karnak the Great, right?
Karnak the Great. That's Karnak the Great. That's right. So, a lot of those funny people were the ones that they had society by the horns. Now the people that have the most sort of societal cred are the ones that are the most offended. So offense, that dopamine hit of being, I'm a victim, I'm offended by what you just said in your mean-spirited joke about my ancestors or whatever. Those are the folks that now have the societal credibility, that they're at the top of the sort of the power pyramid. And that is, again, you're elevating as a society. When we do this, we're elevating negativity to the top of an already challenging life. And that can't turn out well.
Well, and again, I talked about this before in a different episode about a different topic. The irony of all this for me is not just the fact that the progressives who used to be the ones poking fun are now the ones who cannot be poked fun at. That the irony of that is like super thick. But also people being absolutely unaware that, and again, my opinion is probably biased considerably because I grew up really not just cherishing these guys, but admiring them. I really enjoyed watching them do their thing. Richard Pryor, George Carlin, Eddie Murphy. I would argue without Richard Pryor, the improvement we had in race relations, the improvement Black people had in their lives in this country would have been slowed by 10 years probably without Richard Pryor.
You bet.
Him poking fun at this stuff and George Carlin poking fun at this stuff and Eddie Murphy and those guys poking Lenny Bruce.
Yeah.
Those guys poking fun at it. Sammy Davis Jr. poking fun at this stuff. Without them doing that, the progress we made would have been slowed by years, if not decades. That is the mechanism that closed the gap in many ways.
And it seems to me, Brian, that the reason that is the case, because I agree with everything you just said, I think the reason that's the case is because it's hard to hate somebody that you're in an uproarious, laughter with. If you and three people around you of different races, creeds, colors, whatever, if you're all laughing at some kind of hilarious joke that Richard Pryor told or somebody just told, it's really kind of hard to hate your neighbor when you're having so much fun together. Right.
If the Irish guy, the Jew, and the Black guy are laughing at the Mexican now, and then 5 minutes later, the three are laughing at the Jew, and then 5 minutes later, the other three are laughing at the Black guy. If everyone is equal and everyone gets their turn having fun, and they all see that they're all human, and they all have their things that are worthy of being poked fun at, again, that we all have, the absurd things that we all do.
Right.
Yeah, you would learn that we're all human, and I hadn't really considered that point, but. It can't be by design. Nobody's able to create that, right? I mean, what this is just the evolution or the ebb and flow of how the society, because there's no such thing as, I guess in China there is a such thing as Xi Jinping saying anybody who laughs at me is going to be thrown in the fire or whatever it is. But but what is it here? I agree with all that stuff you're talking about. It makes us all equal and it helped us make progress. Why did it stop? What made it stop?
Because people realized they could monetize hate.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, I think it comes down to that. I think it comes down to if you're making fun of everybody equally, well, you can't raise money on that. You can't mobilize people to get out on the streets to laugh. Right. You mobilize them when there's such a dramatic injustice that's been done. You can't sell them, massive contracts to train your staff on diversity so that you are just humorless people that will never say anything to anybody for fear of violating somebody, hurting somebody's feelings. You can't monetize or organize all of that into control of money and power. I really think that's at the end of the day what it is, because if Richard Pryor and Robin Williams and George Carlin, if all these guys from all these different backgrounds make everybody laugh, then life isn't quite so bad after all. Maybe I can set the outrage aside for a little bit. Yeah, I don't like the guy that is running for a political office that's not of my party. But, Johnny Carson's still going to make fun of my guy and his guy, and it's actually kind of funny. So, lighten up, right? You don't make money when people lighten up. You don't control people when people are when they are not angry. And that's what I think. So, I don't necessarily believe in massive global conspiracies and a cabal in a smoke-filled room telling everybody what to do. But it's very obvious that you can get power through outrage. And the internet empowers that.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't think there's a global cabal that said, henceforth on September 13th, 2009, there'd be no more laughter. I don't think that happened.
Right.
But I do think you can have incentive structures through our legal system that when people start writing checks for, saying things that 18 months before that were deemed funny, and now they're offensive.
Exactly.
And now somebody's attorney has to be paid so that everybody's right in the world again.
Right.
That's just the way the system is. And I would argue that's one of the indicators that the system is broken.
Exactly.
Because it's leading to an outcome which is more like North Korea and less like 1988 America, where people did get along and there was harmony, even though there was people who had shitty situations handed to them in life, fair or not fair.
Absolutely.
People still got along by and large way better than they do now. Nobody cared about who you voted for president in 2000 in 1988. Nobody, and like they would, in fact, if they found it, they would make fun of you for it, like maybe, but that was it. Like,
but
there's no such thing as like literally hating somebody because they voted for Ronald Reagan, though.
Right. Well, and I think part of what's happened as a result is unfortunately, and I mean, I'm in the technology industry. What's happened is the instant ability to communicate outrage via social media, et cetera. We've talked about 2008 and some of the things that have happened technologically in that latter part of the 2010s and up until today has been this ability to mobilize and generate instant outrage and instant action because of the internet. And that has taken that natural, it's sort of supercharged those who would weaponize that, if you will. But it's hard to weaponize comedy. It's hard to weaponize self-deprecation. It's hard to really make a funny situation, a humorous situation into something you can raise money for and sue people for and get eyeballs and clicks. And it's all about, media is all about eyeballs and clicks. And if it bleeds, it leads. I mean, that's always been the case, but it's so much more the case now because of social media. So that's another thing that I think has happened is both that realization that you can get power and money and control this way, and the vehicles available at the drop of a hat via whatever social media platform you've got to empower that sort of power grab.
Yeah, and I'm thinking back to like the cycle from the last crisis era, World War II and whatever, and coming out of that, in that the first turning where everybody's like kumbaya, like whatever team has won. And you're on that team or you're like out, right? Yeah. There was no such thing as in 1951 rooting for China in the Korean War. Like that would not have happened, right?
No.
In that era, you had Hogan's Heroes somewhere. I don't know what year that was, 60s, I guess. I don't know what year that was, but you would know because you were probably only in your 30s by then. But see, that's how it's done, Kenny G. That's how you do it.
That's
anyhow, in that era, it was okay to make fun of Russia. It was okay to make fun of Germany. It was okay to make fun of China. And then when I came along, it was okay to make fun of everyone. Right. And now the pendulum has gone the opposite direction, where it's no longer okay to make fun of those people. It's only okay to make fun of us being rubes stuck in traditional Judeo-Christian values who think that the GIs actually saved the world in 1944.
Exactly. And if you think about it, it's not only not okay, you have to buy into being offended by whatever offends. So I've had some interesting conversations about Star Trek. As I think I'm a Star Trek fan. So
I picked up on that.
Yeah. Well, live long and prosper. Okay.
That's right.
In shows like Hogan's Heroes, in Star Trek, in others, there were episodes that had to do with Nazis. So Hogan's Heroes was all about the Nazis. You had Colonel Klink, and there were in those places, there were Jews that were playing in those roles. So in Star Trek, when they did an episode about the Nazis, the space Nazis, Kirk and Spock, both Jews, and not in Star Trek, but in real life, Shatner and Nimoy are Jews. They played Nazi soldiers pretending to be. And I've had conversations with people. They say, well, how could they do that? How could they emotionally bring themselves to play these evil people that had just 20 years earlier tried to wipe them all out? Or how could, in Hogan's Heroes, Jews participate in that when they were making fun of the Nazis? And the point was that by satirizing the true evil that the Nazis did, and by using it as sort of a backdrop for fictional things, Jewish people could actually do a positive take on history. Not that anything had happened there, but to show the absurdity, the evil of the Colonel Clanks of the world, and they can laugh at it. And the most horrible situation in modern history, how they were treated in Germany, and still they could create a comedy around it. You could never create a comedy around that today. It wouldn't work.
Right. Well, one of the things that comedy specifically does, it is, anybody who's been married or has kids or siblings or parents, so that's a lot of us, know that you can say things in jest that there's always that little bit of truth. Like what's the saying? Like many a truth is said in jest, or some version of that, something like that. It's just an easier opening to a conversation than a frontline assault. Like, I wish you wouldn't do this, or I wish this was different, or whatever. It's easier to make a joke about it.
Sure.
And that is in a much broader sense in comedy. Richard Pryor Mel Brooks is a great example. He was a Jewish guy who, I can't remember what he wrote when he came back from World War II, but people were appalled that he wrote. I wish I could remember what it was. I can't remember. Many people listening will know what it is, but they were appalled that he could do this thing. Right. And the whole point was like, I'm making fun of these idiots. Right. Like the absurdity of these people trying to wipe an entire race and religion off the planet. The absurdity of people believing all their problems for generations could be put on the backs of these people who lived in this geographic area, who had this religion in this point in time. The absurdity that is off the charts ridiculous.
Yeah.
And if you don't laugh, you'll cry. Yep. And if we don't have a conversation where we're making fun of it, what other mechanism is there for us to like confront this? Like you have to make it not cool. And part of making it not cool is to mock it.
Exactly. And if you don't, then, I would propose that what happens is you build up it's like a steam pot boiling. You build up and you build up and you build up, and it leads to some kind of societal explosion because there's no comedic or fictional or, there's no release for all of the evil that we see around us, or there's nothing that shaves off the rough edges to say, well, that was evil, but we can at least make fun of it. We can at least, have some humor around it.
That, again, we're not a topical news podcast. There's plenty of other places for people to get that. That's what we're looking for. But something that Kenny G will be able to research and find is, what was her name? The Harvard dean.
Claudine Gay. Yeah, Claudine Gay, president. Yeah, Dr. Claudine Gay.
She resigns a couple of days ago, finally, after weeks of just getting like barrage with this, like, just scandal after scandal. Yep. Two major scandals anyway. And one of them is plagiarism.
Yep.
And so one of the major news TV news channels was talking about how it wasn't really plagiarism. She just copied somebody's stuff without their permission.
That's right.
And it's like the absurdity of that. Like that is a crystal clear example of like in 1988, you wouldn't have said that because you would have risked being mocked the rest of your life.
Yeah,
like that guy would have been mocked the rest of his life. He would only be known as the guy who said plagiarism isn't bad because it's just copying somebody's stuff without permission. Like,
right.
And now that is something that shall not be mocked. We shall take it serious.
Right.
We will acknowledge that for the great gift he's bestowed upon us of this enlightening that we've now gotten. And we're also supposed to sit back and act like it's not absurd, and it is absurd. And I wish George Carlin was here to.
Could you imagine the routines that Carlin and Pryor and Robin Williams, all these guys? Could you imagine the routines they could do today? That it's a rich environment. I'm struck. There's again topically to this day. There's things like the Babylon Bee and the Onion and others like that have. I mean, on one hand, they also illustrate that society has no tolerance for anything that does not toe the sort of politically correct line, so that, you get the Babylon Bee fact checked. It's a satire newspaper. Get it fact checked.
They were fact checked when they put out a story, a satirical story, where they said CNN bought a washing machine to spin their news story. They were fact checked on that. Like,
breaking: CNN did not go to the appliance store.
Back in 1988, the absurdity of that somebody would have not done the fact check because they would have been mocked mercilessly the rest of their life, and they would be known as the guy who did the dumbass thing, like fact checking that absurd story.
Well, and it's gotten to the point where, these sites like Babylon Bee and Onion, they make their own satire and saying we can't find anything absurd to write that isn't true. Because it's just so completely off the charts, bizarre, and completely violates the sense of any thinking individual, that we can't find something to write that's not true.
Yeah, you know what? This just occurred to me as we were talking through this. One of the things, again, I grew up on George Carlin. I like his take on the 10 Commandments. I think, and again, I'm a guy who has very traditional Judeo-Christian values. It's still funny as hell, like his take on the 10 Commandments. Kenny G, you got to watch the 10 Commandments thing that George Carlin does. One of the things he said was he loves people, but he hates groups. And I think that in this moment, brilliant. Like we're in now, like it's pretty poignant. Like, and he was actually more of a humorist towards the end of his life than a comedian. Like he was spouting more philosophy than he was
sure
comedic kind of thing. Early in his career, he was much more of a comedian, but later in his life, he was more of a humorist, I would say, more of a funny philosopher kind of a thing. But he was really wise in some of these things, and I never really paid attention to that statement until the last couple of years.
Yeah,
where he saw the danger, and I mean like real danger, not like hurting people's feelings danger,
right?
But the real danger of the mob mentality of like really once a target is approved for harming with no consequence, people will do really egregious things to them.
Anything. Yeah, they'll do anything. And that's because you can always take your own justification for a bad action and saying that your neighbor and the rest of your neighbors, you're all doing it as well. And so therefore it must be okay because Brian and Dave are doing it. It must be okay.
Yeah. And one of the things we had as a prevention tool for that was making fun of people who did stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, there was, I think, two sides of it. You didn't want to be mocked and you didn't want to be shamed.
Right.
And when you take out the ability to mock and have fun, and when you also take out the ability to say, well, no, that's shameful behavior. When you take out those two things out of society, then you have no real check or balance against excesses and against power grabs and against just the most bizarre treatment of anybody.
Now that you're saying that, like, I can't speak for other people. I grew up in a particular time in a particular geographic area where this was just kind of how things were expressed. But as I'm thinking back growing up and, my 20s and 30s and 40s and whatever, mocking people only did two things I can think of. It showed another man that you loved him or you cared about him in some way. And it shamed people for doing like really stupid things.
Stupid stuff. Yeah. Yeah.
And if you think about it, like those are two things we're missing right now.
Right.
People are pushing really hard on the idea of being shamed for anything, and we're not really allowed to say we love each other unless you fit into my very tight little tribe. And if you listen, I'm not preaching about this. I experience this where it's hard to love people who I know are hoping for outcomes that I'm very much against.
Right.
That's something I struggle with. I don't know about anybody else, but my point is, mocking for dudes, again, that group of 5 men, they would mock each other to show love. And George Carlin would mock George H.W. Bush to shame him for really egregious behavior. And those are two things that are gone now. And comedy, I think, is being removed as a piece of that.
And so then what do you get in a society where those things are not possible anymore? You get one of the things you get is like that fact check we were talking earlier. The only thing that is a check on anything is the sort of the doctrinal narrative of whoever is in control. So if the doctrinal narrative is this group is oppressed, and therefore, anything you can say nothing about it. This group goes and does a horrible thing, or a member of this group goes and does a horrible thing. You can't say anything about it because that is the commandment. You can't use common sense. You can't say, well, when I was raised, this would have happened because of that, because the narrative is in control, not any sense of, and you can't mock it for that same exact reason.
Well, and the outcome they want is control, and the outcome we wanted was harmony.
Exactly. Harmony and, the melting pot of society and the ability for everybody to get along. Well, of course, when you don't want everybody to get along, when you want separate sort of intersectional victim groups, when that's your desired outcome, you're going to find every reason to exacerbate the differences. And again, humor is going to work against that. And so therefore humor must be oppressed. You must stand outside of what was it, Netflix headquarters and protest Dave Chappelle, a comedian in this era that said things that people didn't like.
Yeah. No, as you're talking about that stuff, it like comedy was a mechanism to level the playing field.
Right.
And the absence of comedy is a mechanism to establish a hierarchy.
Exactly.
It kind of feels that way. It kind of feels that simple.
I think that's a good thesis for this episode, Brian.
Yeah. Well, as always, Dave, pleasure chatting with you about this stuff. And for those listening who are here now in this current era, it's 2024 as we're recording this. If you want to give your opinion, which we hope you do, if you think there's something we said that completely misses the mark as to explaining what this moment in time is like as it relates to something as silly as comedy or lack thereof, come out and tell us. Go to unsilentpodcast.com, drop your comments there, or you can find our social channels there. Go to Rumble. Rumble's a great place. There's a great comment section there. You can put your comments for explain what's like from your point of view. What did we get right? What did we get wrong? Tell Kenny G, that guy living 75 years from now or 60 years from now in the future, what this moment is like from your perspective. And tell them where Dave and I got it completely wrong. We'd love to get your input on that. The whole point of this is to explain to them in the future what this moment is like. Of course, Dave and I have our traditional Judeo-Christian values, but you're going to have a different perspective. We'd love to hear your point of view too. And Kenny G needs to hear what you have to say. So go to Unsilent Podcast on Rumble and find this episode and check it out there. And so until next time, this is Dave and Brian signing off.
See you next week.
Do you want to be unsilent? Make your voice heard on our social media channels and share where you think we got it right or wrong. Go to unsilentpodcast.com for social links so you can join the discussion.